Hey, hey, it's great to finally meet you. Yeah, sure, here, come sit down. Yeah, thanks for coming to meet with me here. Yeah, this is a pretty cool place. Yeah, I don't drink a lot of tea, but I'll definitely have a coffee if you want one. Or yeah, great, great. We'll both get a coffee. Do you drink a lot of coffee, or? Yeah, I find myself drinking a lot of coffee. I'm not much of a bitter person. Well, I guess, both in taste and also just as a person. But I do like my coffee pretty sugary. I'd say a good balance is like two creams, two sugar. You know what I mean? I'm not a snob when it comes to coffee, really. I'll drink anything. I mean, honestly, some of my favorite coffee is just a good, Maxwell House or something. There is one coffee brand that is really good, actually, and it was from the last time I was in New Orleans. I went to the Café du Monde there in New Orleans, and I had the coffee there, and it's just some of the best coffee I've ever had in my life. Apparently, the reason why it tastes so good is because they add chicory to it. So you can actually buy the coffee grounds that Café du Monde uses, the ones with the chicory. You can actually buy it at stores, and I've have like 3 tins of those at home. And man, that stuff is just so good. It just adds a little extra, almost like what's it? It's not like nutty. It's almost like an extra like floral taste to it. I don't know. It's one of those things you just have to try it. But yeah, it's chicory. It's like a chicory plant, and they kind of ground it up and add to the coffee grounds. Again, just really good coffee. They also had really good beignets there. Yeah, I have a little bit of a sweet tooth. I can't turn down a good cookie. Love chocolate chip cookies. I can eat those just about every day. Cosmic brownies. Oh my god, I'm obsessed with cosmic brownies. I know it's a little childish, but I've been eating cosmic brownies since I was a kid. I know they're not like the best, highest quality brownies out there, but there's just some kind of nostalgic factor when I eat them. I remember just eating them all the time in my grandma's house. Crazy fact I learned about cosmic brownies. You know how during like holidays like Easter or Christmas, they come out with a cosmic brownie that's like a different like color, like frosting on top. So for longest time, I thought that was a different flavor. Like how they come out with like the Christmas tree version of the cosmic brownie, and the tree would have like the green frosting. Well, I always thought that was a different flavor of frosting. I would swear up and down that it was a different flavor. Turns out it's not. It's just dyed. But it's because of that weird psychological thing we have where when you eat something with a different color, your brain just turns it into a different flavor. You know what I mean? They did like studies about this. Yeah, just really interesting, isn't that? Just the way our brains like play tricks on us like that. I also heard somewhere that a lot of snow cone flavors are actually the exact same, but it's that weird color trick where each color just tastes different. You know what I mean? Some people will say like, oh, red tastes spicy because we associate it with like, peppers or something like that, or with heat. Or, I always thought that Earl Grey tea is what the color lavender tastes like. Interesting stuff, am I right? So yeah, what do you do for work? Oh, yeah, that's cool, that's cool. Yeah, so I'm looking to get into writing. It's always been a great pastime of mine, a great hobby, and, I would just love to do it full time, but, oh man, it's getting more and more difficult for artists nowadays, especially all this talk about AI generated crap, and all that stuff. But I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna bore you with all that stuff. But no, I just really enjoy art. I love human expression. I think it's just one of the great things to look forward to being alive. You know what I mean? Writing especially has been a big part of my life. Reading especially has been a big part of my life. I remember when I was young, God, I would just devour books so quickly. It actually got to the point where, the books they would assign in high school. Yeah, the moment the teacher would assign those books, I would have already read it that night while everyone else didn't. So I had a bunch of teachers accuse me of cheating because they're like, there's no way you finish, The Great Gatsby, in a matter of like a day or two. And I'm like, yeah, like I have nothing better to do. And it's a great story. You know what I mean? Oh, God, some of my favorite books. That's a great question. Oh, God, I have too many. Um, I should start by saying that I have a huge library, and most of it is to read. you know. So, I really like poetry. I like all forms of poetry. More of the modern stuff. Like, I'm not as big of a fan of like the old, rhymed meter kind of stuff like Shakespeare and Wordsworth and all those guys. I mean, they were great poets, don't get me wrong, and every once in a while I get a hankering to read them, but I'm really interested in the modern poets, especially the postmodern poetry or there's a group of poets called language poets that I really admire. I love poetry a lot because it's just pure expression. And I think poetry is just the closest thing to pure, raw, unfiltered emotion on page. I think it's different than, say, a novel, because a novel has to tell a story, you know what I mean? It has to have character, it has to have all of these like storytelling elements, but poetry doesn't need any of that. Poetry is just an experience, and I love experiences. Like I just love turning off my brain and just being swept away by whatever the poet wants to communicate to me, you know what I mean? It's really hard to describe poetry in words now that I'm kind of thinking about it. It's just one of those things you have to experience. You just have to read it and then say to yourself, how did this poem make me feel, or what does it remind me of, or what do I think the poet was trying to accomplish? It's a lot like a painting, like how multiple people can look at the same painting and have different interpretations about what they think that painting means, or what it means to them, or how they feel about it. Poetry works the exact same way, and that's one of the reasons why I love it. It's one of the purest forms of art. Speaking of painting, I'm also thinking about getting into painting. I love visual art. Visual art is another form of just beautiful expression. There's actually this one poet who I admire the most. His name is Frank O'Hara. On top of being this very talented and very well-known poet, he was actually the museum director for an art museum over in New York City. And a lot of his poems have just this sense of urgency, this playfulness, this imagery that only could have happened in the moment, almost like watching a painter paint something in front of you. So I draw a lot of comparisons between visual art and poetry all the time. Some of my favorite visual artists, my all-time favorite is Salvador Dali. I think the man was an absolute genius, and the fact that he was able to have these big, grand visions, unlike anything on this planet Earth, and all come from just his imagination, I think is extremely inspiring. My favorite painting from him is The Discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, if you've ever seen it. I really do recommend seeing it. And I especially recommend going to the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, where they have the original. It is this extremely tall, magnificent, absolute... words can't describe it. It really encapsulates everything about Dali and even more. The religious imagery, the surrealism, self-inserting himself into his art. Beautiful. It really is just gorgeous. Words, again, can't describe. Kind of like poetry. It really is like poetry happening right in front of you. And I love artists that do that. I think another artist that does that well kind of in the similar vein of Dali, is Frida Kahlo. Her story is extremely inspiring, of course, but her art, my God, her art, it's just, again, it's indescribable. It's surreal, mixed with feminist, mixed with self-reflection, and ah, man, it's just one of the. It's an experience. It's an experience every single time you see one of her paintings, and wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, do you like art or anything like that? Nice, nice. That actually kind of reminds me of another thing that I'm really passionate about, which is Japanese culture, especially Japanese art. I think Japanese poetry, literature, and visual art is just some of the best ever created on this earth. Not to sound like a weeb or anything. Like, I'm not talking about anime. I mean, anime's cool. There's some good ones. There's some bad ones and all that stuff. But I actually don't watch a lot of anime. I've seen only like the classics, like Cowboy Bebop or Full Metal Alchemist or stuff like that. But the stuff that I really love from Japan is Japanese literature, Japanese film as well. Japanese literature is just some of the most beautiful out there. I've been reading her work recently. Her name is Maiko Kawakami. She is a phenomenal writer. Seriously, one of the best alive today. Her works are so powerful, so inspiring, yet so delicately simple. I walk away reading her work just with a new perspective on the world. And I think that's what good art does. I especially think art from Japan understands that, you know what I mean? Where it's more the journey beats the destination. That's one of the things I love the most about Japanese movies. A lot of classic Japanese movies take their time, it's not always about rushing to the conclusion or anything like that. It's more just experiencing the journey, okay? Now we're kind of going back to poetry and visual art and stuff, but what can you say? I just love being taken on a ride, but I like to just take my time getting there, I don't like to feel rushed. That's kind of my problem with a lot of movies in America, you know what I mean? Like a lot of American movies, it's just always car chases, getting straight to the chases and all that stuff. I like to slow down and just take my time. Not to say that American movies are bad. I mean, there's plenty of good American movies. Godfather, great movie. That one definitely takes its time to tell its story. One of my favorite movies is Lost in Translation. The one with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson in Tokyo, Japan. Yeah, great movie if you've ever seen it. Again, tying back to me loving Japanese culture. Of course, a lot of Japanese movies I adore. One of my favorite filmmakers, his name is Yasujiro Ozu. His movies are definitely very slow. They require a lot of patience and a lot of attention to detail, but they are just some of the most beautiful movies you've ever seen. They're so heartfelt. They're so relatable. Literally could make a stone cry. That's just how powerful his movies are. I'd be happy to show you one maybe one day. His best movie is definitely, I think, Late Spring. Has a really good plot, really great acting in it too. Another favorite filmmaker of mine is Beat Takeshi. He makes some pretty crazy movies. Crazy in a sense of he's known for gruesome action, but he only does it in short little bursts, like short little bursts of violent action. But the rest of his movies, like the runtime, is actually spent very slow moments, very hypnotic, you know what I mean? His first movie, I really like the first movie that Beat Takeshi directed. It was called Violent Cop. And the reason why I like it is because it has the standard like action movie plot, but most of the movie is actually very slow and hypnotic. It has this really hypnotic music that plays and these really long shots of Beat Takeshi as both the writer, the director, and the actor just kind of just walking around town, just acting all cool, you know what I mean? So it's a really refreshing pace. We're so used to action movies being non-stop, quick cuts, loud music, but for him to take the action movie kind of cliches and flip them on its head through just visuals and music really speaks to him as a director, you know. So he's definitely he's a great filmmaker to watch. So anyway, I'm yapping a lot. Sorry, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about the things that I like. So what else? Oh yeah. So have you ever been to the like live performances they have here? Yeah, they're actually really cool. There's some good local bands that play here. What kind of music do you like? Oh yeah, yeah. I love the old stuff too. Yeah. I always make a joke that all my favorite musicians are dead. Yeah. I mean, I have nothing against modern music. I'm not one of those cringy people that are like, oh, modern music is dead, it's so trash. No, I'm not one of those guys. Like, look, you can listen to whatever you want, all that good stuff. But man, we just can't deny some of the phenomenal music that came out back then, especially the 1960s. That's one of my favorite eras of music. The Beatles, The Who, the Rolling Stones, oh, the Beach Boys. I gotta talk about the Beach Boys. Oh, man. They're probably my favorite band of all time. Of course, a lot of people know them for the surf music, Surfing USA and all that stuff. I mean, that's really fun music, and don't get me wrong. But when you get deeper and deeper into the Beach Boys discography after the surf stuff, it is some of the most haunting, yet beautiful, most insane stuff sometimes that you'll ever hear. And sometimes you listen to it and you go, this was the Beach Boys? Like this was the band that did like Fun, Fun, Fun or Surf and Safari? And it's like, yeah. A great example, of course, a lot of people mention is Pet Sounds. Considered one of the greatest albums ever made. And yeah, I'll agree. It's definitely a very unique album, not just for the Beach Boys' discography, but also just in pop music. Very sophisticated music for its time. Yeah, just whatever people say about Pet Sounds, it's true. I will admit that I only like a handful of songs off of Pet Sounds, besides the big hits like, Wouldn't It Be Nice, Sloop John B, God Only Knows. I actually really like the song That's Not Me off that album. Great track. Caroline No, probably the closest thing that Brian Wilson ever got to a jazz song. Fantastic stuff. Most casual listeners stop listening to the Beach Boys after Pet Sounds because it was such a radical departure from like the surf music and all that stuff. And of course, look, when you say the Beach Boys, you're going to think of the surf music, the car music, 409, Be True to Your School, all of that stuff. But my favorite era of the Beach Boys is actually a lot of the stuff after Pet Sounds. So a lot of people talk about the shelved album Smile. So I have a bit of a hot take with that. Any hardcore Beach Boys fan will tell you that their planned follow-up album to Pet Sounds called Smile should have been released. It ended up not getting released because of a lot of issues. Like the band was going through a lot of personal issues. Brian Wilson had drug issues, and he also had a lot of self-confidence issues about the album, to the point where he really didn't know what the album was going to be. Smile eventually didn't get a full release until 2011, fun fact, as a box set. Unfortunately, listening to Smile, I'm actually kind of glad it got shelved. The main reason why is because Brian didn't know what he wanted that album to sound like. He didn't know what it wanted to be. So when you listen to Smile today in its current state, it's just all over the place. There's short little instrumentals next to lyrics about vegetables, next to a 5-minute length just soundscape of a fire breaking out called Mrs. O'Leary's Cow. It was just too much, and we can attribute a lot of this to Brian's mental state, drug use, all of that stuff. So I'm actually really glad that Smile got shelved, because had it released, I don't think it would have gotten the acclaim it would of its time. It would have been considered a very avant-garde album by all means, but I would even go so far as to argue that the retooled version of Smile, called Smiley Smile, that they released in 1967, is just as avant-garde for its time. Again, the album came out in 1967, and there's a track on that album called the Woody Woodpecker Symphony that doesn't sound like anything the Beach Boys or anyone else of that time would release. It's just a really eerie, dark soundscape, and it really shows you the psyche of Brian Wilson's mind going on at that time. There's another great song off that album, next to, of course, Good Vibrations, which one of their big hits, but also a really interesting song because it doesn't really have much of a dedicated structure. It's almost like 3 songs that are like stapled together, and I know that's kind of what Brian was going for at the time. Really beautiful song, I need to listen to it again. But there's another song off of Smiley Smile, which is With Me Tonight. Beautiful, beautiful song, very underrated. It's like a doo-wop song on acid, if it makes sense. Yeah, hard to describe, but there's no instruments. It's just all of the boys a cappella, just singing these phrases over and over again, almost like a doo-wop group. Really beautiful lyrics as well. I need to listen to that again. Very haunting, very haunting. You wouldn't expect it from the Beach Boys. No, so it's actually not my favorite album by them. My favorite album by them is the album they released in 1977, 1978 called The Beach Boys Love You. Oh my god, I think it's just one of the best albums ever made. It truly is. It came out during a time where Brian Wilson was really at a creative peak. A new creative peak, I would say. And he started experimenting more with synthesizers, and Love You has this very synth-heavy sound, which, again, this was 1978. Some of the synths on there sound like something from the mid-80s. Like, he was really thinking forward when it came to synth sounds. Some critics and fans like to say that The Beach Boys Love You was the first Beach Boys punk album. I think punk is a decent word to describe at least the first track, which is Let Us Go On This Way. Probably one of the hardest, like, industrial sounds they ever had. But really, I think the rest of the album has this really whimsical quality to it. I wouldn't necessarily call it punk. There's a really silly song off the album that, unfortunately, I do tend to skip a lot, but it really kind of encapsulates what the album really is. It's a song called Solar System, where the lyrics talk about, the different planets and what they mean and all that stuff. Again, I think it's a super silly song and probably shouldn't have been on the album, but that's just kind of the vibe that the Beach Boys Love You have. It's almost like a whimsical journey, almost like watching a live musical. You know what I mean? Some really good, catchy songs on there. There's one called Honkin' Down the Highway. Again, sounds almost childish, but man, that song is a banger. Roller Skating Child, another fantastic song, very catchy. Love listening to that on repeat. There's also some really good ballads off that album that, again, it's that childhood-ish kind of like earnesty that makes these love songs work so well. One of them is called I'll Bet He's Nice. Great lead vocal by Dennis Wilson, who was the band's drummer. He was also considered the most good-looking one out of the Beach Boys. Very great vocal. Very sad that he died so young. He died in a boating accident, actually. He drowned. And it really affected the band hard after his death. Yeah, so a few of the members are actually still alive right now. So Brian Wilson is still alive. Mike Love and Al Jardine and Bruce Johnston. Now, Bruce Johnston wasn't around in the beginning. He entered the band in around like late 60s, actually. When Brian Wilson refused to go on tour anymore, Johnston would take his place. Right now, the band that's called The Beach Boys that's touring is actually just Mike Love and Bruce Johnston with like a bunch of like studio musicians or whatever. So it's not really The Beach Boys. The problem is that even though the four of them are alive, they're just not on speaking terms anymore. There's a lot of legalities with that stuff, and good lord, just read their Wikipedia page, and they're probably the most litigated band that ever existed. There was also their first guitarist when the Beach Boys first started back in like 1962, 1963, I think. His name was David Marks. He left the band around 1964, I believe. No, wait. No, he joined the band in 1961, left in 1962-ish, 3-ish, right before the band had their first mega hit. He was replaced with Al Jardine. And yeah, so David Marks is still alive. He just doesn't do really much of anything nowadays, unfortunately. But yeah, he was one of the original Beach Boys before he kind of left the band. Unfortunately, my favorite Beach Boy, Carl Wilson, he passed away in the 90s from cancer. Very, very sad. He was known as the voice of the band. You know, he lended his voice to one of their most iconic songs, which is God Only Knows. In fact, on his, fun fact, on his tombstone, it actually says, you know, Carl Wilson, the voice of an angel. And I think that's probably one of the most fitting things you can say about him. Yeah, I know a lot about the Beach Boys, as you can tell. Yeah, you know, if I ever, get too carried away, just stop me. Well, thank you. Hope I'm not boring you. Oh, well, thank you. Sorry, it's just been a while since I've talked to someone about my interests, and, you know how it is. Wow, I just realized what time it was. Man, time has flown by. Yeah, I should probably head back myself, but it was great meeting you and great talking to you. We should do this again sometime, If you're interested, of course. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, let's work on a time sometime. Do you have my number, by the way? Ah, cool. Great. Yeah, seriously, take care. It was really great talking to you. Bye.